Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today's episode is going to be super fun. I have with me as my guest, Mark Hentemann, a two-time Emmy Award nominee. Mark Hentemann is a writer, executive producer, voice actor, and former showrunner for the animated series Family Guy, having written for the show since its very first season. He also created the series 3 South for MTV and the animated show Border Town for Fox. In addition to his successful career as a writer for TV and film, Mark has had a parallel career in multifamily real estate investing. He is the founder of Quantum Capital, which manages a portfolio of 1,000 plus units in Denver, Austin, and Los Angeles. He is also the host of the Wild West Real Estate podcast, offering listeners real estate strategies and insights for navigating an investing landscape that feels like the Wild West. Mark Hentemann, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thanks, Eric. I am excited to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
It's my delight to have you on here. Thanks so much for agreeing to it. So I'd like to begin, as I usually do with these interviews, by asking you to think back on your earliest childhood memory or memories, your earliest sense of who it was or what it was you wanted to do or be in this world. And if you could also give us a little bit of context about the environment you grew up in, that would be helpful as well.
Okay, sure. Well, I grew up in Ohio, outside of east of Cleveland, and yeah, I loved it. It was great. What was my earliest memory was probably on my driveway, on my driveway with the next door neighbor who was like my age. And I remember, I think we were three. I think like when I turned 3 years old, I remember I was so excited about it. And the next door neighbor had turned three, a couple months before me. And we were both three. And that was just the greatest thing in the world.
Excellent. So you were excited about being three.
Yeah, right.
I think that's the most unique answer I've gotten to that question.
It's a cool age. It was a great age.
It's amazing you can remember that far back and that specifically.
I know.
What
I
were
can't
your
remember a month ago, but I remember that.
Yeah. What were your inclinations, as a young kid? What drew your fascination, or what was your, what were you drawn to, in your earliest days as a kid that you can remember?
The earliest things, I remember riding my bike. I remember I was drawn like two things. I was drawn to football. I love my dad. I think my dad played football. I know my dad played football in college and then in the army. And he watched football all the time, and I loved football. It just seemed awesome. But I was also, as I grew up, I realized that I'm never going to be, I don't have the athleticism or the size. I was always very short, one of the smallest kids in my class. But drawing, I think my mom, I remember my mom would always say, "Oh, I had three siblings. There were four of us kids." And my mom would always say, "Oh, Mark, you were the easiest of my children. Like the other three were bouncing off the wall, and you could just sit in the corner and draw for like hours on end." And I always like when, as an adult, I would be like, "Do you think maybe I was on the spectrum somewhere?" Like, because I was very introverted, and that was just comfortable for me. Like and it was it was a blessing in a lot of ways. I could focus. And I think that's been a through line in my whole life. I can focus for really long periods of time and and focus pretty deeply. And it's helped me, kind of take on challenges, for example, writing in like comedy, and to try to understand that it takes a lot of hours and a lot of like, a lot of concentration to be able to get to a level of competence.
Absolutely. Focus is an indispensable quality, I think, to succeeding at any endeavor. But what I've noticed about myself, and I always, really find fascinating, is that, and I'm sure most listeners probably could relate, is that with certain things I have seemingly unlimited focus, and then with other things almost none.
Right.
And some of that I think is really about, what interests me. That's how I always was in school. I could focus on things I didn't, wasn't particularly interested in. Like I knew how to play the game of school, well enough to get the grade that I needed. But as soon as the test was over, I wouldn't retain anything unless it was of
Right.
actual interest. Right.
Right.
Um, so yeah. So, and it sounds like also you were very at home, not just, you had this ability to focus, but you were very at home with your imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked exploring and liked drawing and almost anything, I guess I was slanted on the right, right brain, as a kid.
Yeah. And so you had this interest in drawing. At what point did you develop a fascination with comedy? Do you remember? Were there any particular moments or influences or, TV shows or films that lit you up as a
Yeah,
kid?
definitely, definitely. And maybe it was a little bit of where I fell in the family. Like my older brother was, I had a brother who was a year and a half older than me, and he to this day, runs a hedge fund. He's a Wall Street guy, and he was, ingrained. And I don't know if my parents put the pressure on him, but just he was the responsible one, and the one that like, I always thought like I was always just like riding in the wake of my older brother, whatever school he chose to go to, or if he went where he went to kindergarten, I would just follow a year later, and he would have blazed the path. He would have like navigated it, figured it out, and I could just sort of coast behind him.
Hmm.
And we did that at every school he went to. I would follow like a year later, and it was easy. He had to bear the brunt of it. Like we went to a kind of an inner city Catholic school in Cleveland, and it was rough. It was like gang neighborhoods and all that stuff, and you had to take the bus like across town. It was like a 40-minute bus ride where you had to change buses at a couple places, and that was that would have been terrifying as a ninth grader. But yeah, but my brother figured it out. Like,
Interesting. So did you feel that there were expectations upon you? For instance, if you had the same teachers that he had, or like, oh, what's your brother's name?
Chris, yeah.
So you're Chris's brother. And then automatically did that set any sort of expectation of, on you? Or it sounded like for you, it actually helped and made it
Right. It
like
was
he helped
favorable.
facilitate your
He
journey
wasn't,
through school.
yeah, he wasn't a troublemaker. He was the guy, he got great grades, and my grades were just as good, I think. But yeah, like he was the pioneer. He was the guy like catching the arrows,
Did he look
but
out for you? Like, did he help you, like actively help you kind of like find your way? Or was it just the fact that he had already blazed the path and
I think it was a lot of that, like just the fact that he blazed the path. I bet he probably resented a little bit that I had it so easy behind him, and he had to deal with some pretty tricky, like I said, he's the pioneer. Like, man, the neighborhood where we went to, this Jesuit high school, like there was guns, you could hear
Oof.
gunfire, and it was there was a lot of gangs, and so it was not a good neighborhood at all. And kids always got beat up, like,
Hmm.
or mugged, just trying to get home.
Wow.
Um, but it was a great experience, just thrown into the fire. And I liked it. I mean, I didn't never wanted to be pampered.
Right.
Maybe that was the football thing. I was like, I want to be tough.
Interesting.
Learn how to be tough.
That's funny. Or so were you second in birth order then? Did you
I
have?
was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you talk about this toughness. Now, I know that from a little research that I did that a little book called The Tough-Minded Optimist was influential to you when you were a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That was a weird experience. Like, I mean, I feel like, I was very introverted and just temperamentally, like, I was creative. I was shy. I was introverted. And I think I was depressed. I
hmm,
think I went through depression as a kid. And I just remember just having these like dark, you know, this just gloominess, and maybe it was insecurity, maybe it was fear of like, what am I doing? Where am I going? Um, and
were
it
you
was,
bullied? You mentioned like,
no,
okay.
no, never bullied. I wasn't, maybe reasonably popular. Like I was always the best drawer,
Hmm,
you called it that back in like
mhm.
fifth grade when it meant something. Like if you were in fourth grade, you could draw like really well. Like, hey, the teachers would hang my things up. And I like loved sports, like I was looking up to my dad and I wanted to be a football player and a basketball player and a track. And those, I was athletic in sports, though small, but yeah, I think I just had, maybe it was seasonal affective disorder, like
Hmm,
growing up and, right on Lake Erie, practically in Canada, dark all the time and freezing.
yeah.
And uh, I think there was a bit of depression to me. And I remember of the kids, I remember my mom saying like, why, why are you so sensitive? Like,
Hmm,
um, and I had this I didn't diagnose it at the time, but I went through these gloomy times. And I remember wandering in, we lived in a sort of tight house. Like, I was always in my parents' bedrooms, or, you had to cross through to get to the bathroom. And one day I just like saw this book on my mom's nightstand, and it had been clearly given to her from her father, like going back to like the 1940s. And it was this paperback, like tattered paperback book called The Tough-Minded Optimist. And I remember I pick it up and I'm looking at it, and there's like this picture of the guy on the front just looked so confident and like, you know, just had this like strong jaw. And like, I'm like, wow, that guy can, he's not afraid of anything. Like, and I read the book and I was like, skeptically. And then I read it again. And then I read it like a third time. And I was like, I want to learn all of these like techniques of how to have mental toughness and how to have optimism. And it was Norman Vincent Peale was the author of it. And I guess that came in it was my grandfather. There was a little insignature on the back, and it was this tattered old book. But it was clearly given to my mother from her dad, who went through the Great Depression.
hmm.
And he had probably passed it on to my mom, and I just read it, and I read it over and over again. And it was very old fashioned, but I was like I was a bored kid. I had time on my hands. So I just read it, and then I read it again. And then I was skeptical. I'm like, this isn't going to work. This is going to be nonsense. And then I noticed a change happening on the way I was like, in the way I saw the world, and with the way I processed things. And it became, I don't know where you heard me mention that before, because I don't really mention it much.
Yeah.
but yeah, it was like I'm there's a choice. I mean, the big thing is like every moment instead of letting your brain react, like you can choose your attitude towards anything, and it could serve you, and you can choose to have it serve you, and that became, a bit of it became something was devoted to.
Wow. How old do you think you were when you read that?
7th grade.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I guess the key is you have to have awareness of your thoughts before you can
Yeah.
make a decision. And, reactivity is sort of our nature in in a sense. And it really takes presence, and it really takes a certain amount of consciousness and awareness to even realize, for instance, that you are reacting a certain way, or
Right.
that you have a certain worldview, because it's
Right.
just your default. So that's amazing to have to encounter a book like that and to take it to heart. It sounds like also it was more than just the title that drew you. It was the significance of the book. It had been passed down by your grandfather, and that probably carried some additional weight to it, I would think.
Yeah. And I think when I picked it up, like, because yeah, I think when I picked it up, the title, it was the title, and it was the image of the author, like, on it,
Hmm.
and with this, like, he had this just steely look in his eyes, as like, I want that.
Yeah.
And then and just having and I recognized that I went into funks,
Hmm.
I went into depression, and sometimes I felt like the world was overwhelming, and it was just too much to bear, and I wanted a path out of that.
Yeah. Were there any other influences on you, books or otherwise, that helped you with just sort of worldview, mindset, outlook? Because the future that was facing you was going to require some tough-mindedness.
Yeah, I picked up stuff from either athletes, like, because I was a big sports fan, and like what they had written on the locker room wall. I think maybe the Lakers had something that I would butcher. Um, but it was like massive energy, massive enthusiasm, massive exuberance.
Hmm.
And that was what was like on some kind of sports locker room. And I'm like, yes, that's it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you just like embrace that, and like that energy. I love that energy, and like, let's do it. Um, and
Cool.
it was training. I was trying to
Nice.
train my mind out of that sort of victim, scared kid,
Hmm.
into something strong, and fierce, and able to tackle, to welcome challenges.
Right. Yeah.
And
Fascinating.
a sort of adjunct to that is when I kind of was, I was in high school, I was doing that. Maybe that was like end of grades, elementary school, high school. I started to drift. I was like, I know I like comedy. I noticed that. I was like, wow, I really like comedy. Like, and I think at the time it was Steve Martin, Wild and Crazy Guy,
Mhm.
and other, you just the art form of comedy was very exciting to me. But it was always that, like, that mindset. Like, I was always taking care of my mindset after I had sort of pulled out of that depression. And I remember after my first year of college, I go to college, and I wanted an adventure. I wanted something to sort of test my mettle. And I don't know why I did this, but I came home and I told my mom, I'm like, Mom, hey, I think I'm gonna go. I I'm gonna go out to. I had heard about Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, and I'm in Ohio. But I think like one of my cousins had been out there, and I decided to go to Martha's Vineyard by myself. And this was back when Martha's Vineyard wasn't as developed as it is now. And I went out by myself, and to survive, and just with nothing. I had like a backpack, and I went out there, no job, and yeah, it was fun. I slept on the beach for like the first couple nights, because there was nowhere to sleep, but I wasn't alone. Like, there was other other just sort of college kids or like, vagrants or whatever, sleeping on the beach who didn't have a place to live. And then I found a job and I found a place to live
Hmm.
and made money. And then that was my like great adventure as like an 18-year-old.
Fascinating. So did you do that? What time of like was that during a summer break or what?
Yeah, that was after the summer. That was the summer after my freshman year of college.
Got it. So you gave yourself, it sounds like this assignment or this challenge, like let's see if I can survive independently. And you chose this location and you literally just got yourself there and kind of fended for yourself and figured it out as you went. Is that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted.
Was that empowering? Did that feel like a successful,
Yeah,
experience?
it was great. It was great. And maybe part of it was I think I had seen the movie Jeremiah Johnson, which was an old, probably a very obscure movie about this, but it was an old like Robert Redford movie. And it was probably I think it was a true story, but just some guy in the 1800s who went to live in the mountains. He was tired of civilization and went to live in the mountains. And the whole thing is him, figuring out how to survive,
Yeah.
and all the dangers and all that stuff. But I figure like, yeah, I'll go out to Martha's Vineyard and see if I could fend for myself and get a job. And I remember my dad loaned me like $500, like right as I was leaving, and I didn't have much money. I think he gave me $500. He's like, here, you could pay me back when you finish.
Hmm.
And I, after the summer was over, I came home and I paid him 500. Here's your $500. And he told me, and I was like, of course, like, yeah, he wanted it back and I was going to give it back. And I did. And he was like, I never thought you would give me that money back.
Mm, nice. So it sounded like there was a bit of encouragement or at least concern, right, for your welfare.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and you surprised him by actually paying him back, which must have felt
Right.
good for you, right? Like to,
Yeah. I
kind
didn't
of
realize
prove.
he'd be impressed, but he was impressed.
Yeah. Was the assignment that you gave yourself like I'm going to do this for the summer? Was that were there any
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
that the
Cause
yeah.
I knew I had to go into like sophomore year.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. I think that's really cool. Um so comedy, so you were captivated by comedy. You mentioned Steve Martin as one particular influence. Did this, but you're a self-described introvert. So I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that you weren't the class clown type. Did you perform in any ways, formal or informal, in front of your peers? Like, was there any social capital to being funny when you were a teenager, or was it really just your own kind of private interest?
Yeah. I think I never performed, and it was always daunting to me. Yeah, just to get on a stage or anything like that. So I really never performed. Um, and I think my friends thought I was funny, and I think they would mention it. But but it was just my weird rabbit hole. Like I would go home and whether it was listening to Steve Martin or like The Far Side, like Gary Larson, if you remember that. Like I
Yep.
loved those, and I would draw and I would try to
Mm.
do my own versions of those. Um, yeah, I really liked comedy. Comedy was the best, you know.
Who doesn't like to laugh, right? It's
Right.
it's just where we I think vary is in our senses of humor and what we find funny. But you mentioned The Far Side. I loved The Far Side, and then the first one that I actually remember that came to mind when you mentioned it was a cartoon where there was this family sitting on the floor in a barren living room, staring at a blank wall, and the caption was "In the days before television."
Yeah, just aimlessly looking at the wall.
Yeah, like no TV, so we're just going to stare at the wall.
Right, right.
Yeah,
That's all I had to do is set the TV in front of them.
Right. Once it got invented.
Yeah.
And you often had animals, I recall too,
Yeah.
anthropomorphized animals, giving a certain
Yeah.
kind of perspective on things.
And in my opinion, growing up, the weirder the better. Like in Gary Larson got pretty pretty out there.
Yeah.
But I loved it.
Cool. So, and it was sort of a way to combine your interest in drawing with your interest in comedy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I was always drawing, and I liked drawing crazy characters. Um and then yeah, just in college, when I was in high school, I guess I did some writing and and I think like, I don't know. I don't know that I ever thought seriously about any kind of career in comedy. Um, but but when I got to college, I was kind of bored with my major, and I didn't really know what it was supposed to be. Like, I was organizational communications. Um, and it was like puzzled as to what that was.
Well, how did you even decide on
I
that
think
major?
I think I started in psychology. I think when I was going into freshman year, you had to declare some kind of major, and probably because I don't know if I've really connected this, which is embarrassing because it's so obvious, but probably because you know, I was working on my own psychology. I was my own psychologist,
Mhm.
like through grade school and high school, and I was very tuned into like how I'm thinking and what the messages are that I'm sending myself. um that that I declared psychology as a major my freshman year. um and then I think I drifted into like creative writing and was taking these courses. I wasn't that intentional of a college student, so I think I probably drifted across. um, I was taking classes that I was interested in. And then maybe after sophomore year, I realized like, okay, I got to graduate. So I probably did the math on what was the shortest
Route to a degree.
to a degree. And it was organizational communications,
That's hilarious.
whatever
Huh.
whatever that was supposed to be.
Yeah, I can relate a lot to the way you described your kind of fumbling your way through college and taking things that interested you and then saying, "Hey, how do I get out of here?"
Yeah, right.
I had a self-designed major and it was the least restrictive major possible offered by my university, and it gave me the freedom to not only choose the courses that interested me but the professors, because I would shop around for professors because I knew that if I was going to have any chance of being engaged, it was going to be a good professor. And I had that luxury where I could shop around.
Oh,
And
that's cool. Yeah.
yeah, because the same subject could be rendered completely lifeless or
Right.
fascinating depending on the teacher.
Everything depends on who your instructor is. They can make it, yeah, like you said, they can make it great or terrible.
Right. So you weren't entertaining the idea of comedy as a career at that point. Did you have any notion at all about a career direction, or at least like concern about it? Or what was your mindset like in regard to that? Let's say, as you were finishing college and, about to enter the quote unquote real world.
Yeah. Well, ironically, like I'm 50 plus years old now, and it took a long time to sort of like recognize this. But but when I was in high school and I loved, I realized that I just, I got excited about a comedy, and I liked comedy. I liked, The Far Side and Steve Martin and all those influences. Um, but yeah, who's the Stephen Wright
Oh,
another
yeah.
one who was great. But uh, I I was in Ohio, and I there was zero consideration in my brain that that I could go join Hollywood and do anything out there. That was like a world away, that wasn't opened to
Hmm.
me. And but then because I had never known anybody in the entertainment industry, anybody who had even tried, ever, nobody even talked about it. Like, we laughed at the shows and the movies that we watched and loved them. We were obsessed with Caddyshack and Animal House and all that stuff. And I think one summer, my friends and I watched Caddyshack every day of the summer. That was our goal. But it was nothing was it was never like an option in my brain. But I then found out, I had entered college, and I was we were bored, and a friend of mine and I were going to start a humor publication because we were kind of bored with our majors. And I discovered I was obsessed with I'll try to get through this efficiently. But I loved Animal House and Caddyshack. And those two movies, if you recall, were written by like kind of the same team. And it was like Harold Ramis and Doug Kenny. And they were the guys that started the National Lampoon. And I discovered when I was in like maybe early years of college or late high school that Doug Kenny, one of the guys who founded National Lampoon and wrote Caddyshack and Animal House, lived on my street. Like,
You're
or
kidding.
grew up on my street. And it was probably 5 miles down the street, like east of me.
Yeah.
But it was on, he had the Cedar Road was the same.
Wow.
Was the same road. And I was like, wow, this is my favorite movie. These are my favorite movies. And this guy grew up in Ohio. And I like sort of, he died by this time.
Really?
Yeah. But he had a tragic, he fell off a cliff. That's how he died.
Wow.
But I kind of became a little bit obsessed with him because I was like, this guy was like my favorite, had his creative output was some of my favorite movies. And the fact that he lived on my street, like, made it possible to me. Like if he did that, maybe I could do that. And I remember just kind of trying to learn about him. And he had gone to Harvard and written for the Harvard Lampoon, and then started the National Lampoon. Sorry, I got something in my eye, but and
so that's interesting. National Lampoon came out of Harvard Lampoon. Is that where that
yes.
and I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, it was back in maybe the early 70s, maybe even like 1969, somewhere around there, that Doug Kenny and Henry Beard were two, they were running the Harvard Lampoon, and they wanted
to take it nationally.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. And that's what they did. And then they ended up making movies together. But yeah, so it became a little bit of an obsession. I remember my older brother went to Boston College, and I visited him my freshman year of college. He was a year older than me. And while I was there, while he was at school, like in his classes, I went over to the Harvard, the Harvard Lampoon, and I knocked on the door, and this guy opens the door, and I'm like, hey, I'm just, I love the Harvard I love the Lampoon, the National Lampoon as well. I don't know how I talked myself in, but this guy was friendly. He was a member of the Harvard Lampoon. He's like, you want a tour? And he showed me these, like, the whole Harvard Lampoon castle on Harvard was built by Randolph Hearst.
Interesting.
Yeah, like he built that whole castle. He was a member of the Harvard Lampoon, and they had all these like secret rooms and trapdoors. And he had this guy. I wish I knew his name because he's probably somewhere in the entertainment business, but he was a great guy. I appreciate what he did. He gave me like five copies of the Harvard Lampoon magazine, and I brought them home and went through it all. And it was glossy, and it was like a high quality magazine. But I also was like, this isn't any funnier than like than anything I could do.
Right.
Like this is rudimentary comedy,
Hmm.
and so I started one on Miami of Ohio. Started a humor publication, and that's what became like the last 2 or 3 years of my college experiences. I ran this humor publication.
Wow. And what came of that publication? Did it stop when you graduated? Were
Yeah.
were there any milestone achievements that meant something to you in terms of either the content you created or the distribution of it, or any such things?
I guess, I enjoyed the entrepreneurial aspect of it as well as the creative aspects of it. But we put it out consistently, probably 4 times a year, from starting from my sophomore year. So for probably, 3 years, I ran this, and my like I was the editor, and my friend was the publisher. And we always like got enough ads. It became kind of a cool, hip kind of publication, underground publication. So all the bars and restaurants wanted to advertise with us. So we
Huh.
were like a profit, slightly profitable business, but we weren't losing money, and it was popular.
So this
Um,
was really independent of the school. You didn't need the school's permission or anything. This was a venture that you and your friend, did on your own, and
yeah,
you figured it out on your own. How and where did you print them?
we used this company called Oxford Press, and it was
Hmm.
in Oxford, Ohio. And it was just, it's a tiny town. They had the Oxford, they published the local newspaper. And so there was a publishing facility,
So it's
and we
not even
walked.
like you were using the university's equipment that you like
Right.
you really truly took the reins on this, and were really, it was an independent enterprise.
Yeah, it was on an entrepreneurial thing. And yeah,
Fascinating.
we walked into the local newspaper publishing facility and said, "Hey, can we hire you? Will you guys, we'd like to publish this underground newspaper." And they looked at some of it and they liked it, and they thought it was subversive and cool. And so I
Wow.
think they gave us a pretty good price on the
That is awesome. Do you
yeah.
have any original copies still of the?
I do. I have stacks of them in my
That's great.
attic now, probably collecting mildew.
Yeah.
But that became my, like, I always needed to write articles for it, the demand for articles and
Mhm.
filling the content. And I would draw cartoons. Like I would, and I was kind of influenced by Gary Larson. So I was doing like cartoons, and a few of them were like college related or college themed, but it was just kind of weird stuff. And I think that began, I think everything that I've ever been good at, I can trace back a long trajectory of growth in it. Nothing came easy quick.
Mhm.
And people say like, oh, well, you got hired by Letterman off of your greeting cards. But that what allowed me to do that is because I be, I got thrown into being like a caricature artist in high school at SeaWorld. And I got struck by lightning while I was there drawing caricatures, by the way.
Yes, no, I
Um,
know that story, and I went and looked up what the odds were of such a thing.
yeah,
According to the National Weather Service, I don't know if you know this. Do you know what the odds are of
I
being
have no
struck by
idea.
lightning?
No, I've never looked it up.
Okay, so it says, this is according to the National Weather Service, the odds of being struck by lightning in any given year, okay, and however they calculated this, are 1 in 1,222,000.
That's amazing.
Now, the odds of being struck in your lifetime, estimating a life at 80 years, is 1 in 15,300. So that's
Okay.
considerably,
High,
and
higher likelihood.
yeah, and the odds of it being ending in a fatality is around 10% of people that are struck by lightning.
Okay.
Um, you know, but
Interesting.
I'm wondering, given those statistics, how you might compare in your mind. Obviously this is completely subjective, but the odds of getting struck by lightning, by say the odds of succeeding in the entertainment business, let alone succeeding not just like as a one shot success, but building a career over years and decades. It becomes even probably less and less the opposite of the odds with getting struck by lightning, where they increase
Yeah.
over time. Probably they decrease over having any longevity in the entertainment business. What are your thoughts about that?
About longevity in the entertainment business?
Yeah, and also about just from your observation, the odds of being able to sustain a career in that business, given all of the madness of it
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
unpredictability of it.
I think I think it's both very long odds, but at the same time, very doable, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Um, I think if you work hard enough and I think if you focus and can stick with it long enough, I think anybody could do it,
Hmm.
honestly. Like I think creative talent is, naturally born talent is not a huge factor. I everyone I see, like after a 25-year career, um, it's kind of time on task,
Hmm.
because I've seen so many writers enter our world or our writers' room and be terrible at the beginning, and they seem hopeless, and then but if they work hard enough, like if they focus and they, it's like putting in your 10,000 hours, you get to be, you can go from being terrible to being average, and then you can get average to being good, and then you could be, you I've seen people go from being terrible to being some of the best writers in the room.
Wow.
And it's you got to put in your thousands and thousands of like deep learning hours to understand how it all works. And
Hmm.
then you just, there's and then you just let your then your mind like knows where to look.
Yeah, and I suppose the inverse is true insofar as you could have a natural genius for something, but if you're not willing or able to hang in there, and put in the time, but also have the patience to, and maybe the social acumen as well to forge good relationships.
Yep.
All of those things, it might, you might not succeed even with an abundance of natural talent. So there's a lot of factors, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I know definitely the relationships and the social aspect is definitely a factor. Um, if you build the right relationships in the industry. But yeah, I think being the introverted person, I was never sort of that focused on the networking aspect of it. But I think like everything that I've gotten good at and gotten well, that I've been rewarded financially or what, like with success, I can always trace it back, like I guess we were talking about, like I was a caricature artist. I was 17 when I started doing those caricatures, and then I went from the caricatures into college, where I started that humor publication, and I was putting in thousands of hours
Hmm.
like on cartoons and writing throughout my college. So there's like a runway. It takes a really, that's why so few people succeed in that business is it's just a long runway to get off the ground and be good and have those skills.
Hmm.
And in the areas that I've sort of been successful at, I can see that long runway that allowed me to get good.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I think.
I could also see my failures. Like Letterman, I didn't last long, and there was extenuating circumstances, like given
Yep.
the late night talk show wars that
Yeah,
I was in.
we need to definitely get to that story. That's an important piece of your journey, I think, not to mention just fascinating to hear about. So, um, you out of college, I know that you basically a friend of yours, you were just sort of doing odd jobs, and a friend of yours pointed you in the direction of an ad in Spin Magazine for they were looking for someone that could create greeting cards, right? Write and
Yes.
illustrate them. So
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit about that gig and how that led to New York City, the Ed Sullivan Theater, and working for David Letterman?
Sure. Yeah. Like you mentioned, I was unemployed. Like after college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was an organizational communications major, but
They
I was
weren't banging on your door with that degree?
right, right. And I was a waiter. I was basically a waiter, and a friend of mine, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I was still kind of searching, like, what do I do post college? But a friend of mine knew I was broke, as I was always broke, and he knew I needed a job, and he said he showed me an ad in Spin Magazine, and it was for a greeting card company looking for greeting card writers. And I thought, Spin Magazine is a national magazine. My chances of this are probably zero. But I had all these cartoons that I had collected, that I had drawn
You had
through
a
college.
portfolio.
I
Yeah.
had a portfolio of cartoons. And so I was like, yeah, and they were sort of Gary Larson-esque, single, just one frame. And so I just cut a bunch of those out, put them on the front of folded pieces of paper, wrote "Happy Anniversary" on the inside, and sent them to the address. And miraculously, I got hired, and I was
Wow.
hired.
Were they looking for someone who could also draw, or was it a writing gig?
I think they were looking for writers, but I sent them these cartoons, and on my interview, they called me to come in, and I come in, and it was, it was a pretty short interview. They were like, "You want to work for us?"
Hmm.
And I was like, "Sure, yeah." And they're like, "We're going to hire you as a writer illustrator because you could draw." And so that was it. And it was the alternative humor. It was a brand new department at American Greetings. Everybody probably maybe has heard of American Greetings. And they had this new department called the Alternative Humor Department that they were launching, which was distinct from their conventional humor department, which those writers serviced the licensed characters like Ziggy, Garfield, Strawberry Shortcake. And then our department was brand new. It was in the 90s where everything was in alternative, and they were trying to chase that sort of a younger demographic. So nobody knew really what it was. I don't think the executives at American Greetings even knew what that was supposed to be, but they wanted to connect with the Gen X.
Right. So it was good timing.
It was great timing. Yeah.
Because I think, doing these innocuous, saccharine, lifeless greeting cards, I can't see you enjoying that. I don't know who does those and enjoys it, but it's a gig, I guess. Did this involve relocating? Where were they?
No, they happened to be, it was a 40-minute drive, but it was outside of Cleveland.
Okay. Wow. That's kind of amazing too, right? They could have been anywhere in the country.
Right. My friend, my friend had this ad in Spin Magazine. I can't recall if like they had an address that was because obviously I sent it somewhere. I sent the submission somewhere, but yeah, it was very convenient that that I could drive there, and yeah, that's where I would be working. I wouldn't have to move.
Right. So I'm curious now. I understand that you met your wife, the woman who became your wife, fairly young, and this was still back in Cleveland. Is that right?
I met her at Miami of Ohio.
Oh,
Miami
in
University.
college.
Yeah,
Okay,
college.
got
Yeah,
it.
and she lived on the other side of her family was maybe 45 minutes away west of Cleveland.
And any memory or story of how you guys got together?
We met in college, and I think her one of like her best friend was a friend of someone of one of my friends. And yeah, we didn't date in college. We just kind of had always known each other and were friendly. And then after school, after we both graduated, she had taken a job in Cleveland, and I saw her more and more regularly, and that's how we
Hmm.
kind of started dating. And yeah, and then she moved up. You know, when I moved up to New York, she didn't join me immediately, but maybe like 5 months after or something, she moved up.
Got it. Okay. And so the move to New York was precipitated by.
By yes, so yeah, I was a greeting card writer, and got a I loved it. It was what a
Hmm.
dream job. Like you're drawing pictures, you're writing, you have no oversight. We'd play football in the parking lot, and it was just a lot of like unsupervised
Wow.
time. But I realized at some point that I didn't want to be sitting in a cubicle for the next 40 years, because there were some old timers. Nobody seemed to leave that job. So
Huh.
there were some old timers. And I'm like, I don't want to be that. Um, Although as great as that job was, I mean, it was like, what a dream job. So I started, I looked up agents online, did a search, called a number at the William Morris Agency, which was in New York City, the biggest, most prestigious agency in the
Start at the
world.
top, right?
Start at the top. And got my head ripped, almost bitten off by the receptionist who said, like, send it to the mailroom, whatever, like cut me off. Um and I was like, whoa, that's New York City. And you know discouraged by that, but I did put together a submission, sent it, and thought like, this is a huge waste of time. But I got a call like maybe 2 or 3 weeks after I sent my submission, maybe a month. I'm a little vague on that. But just one day I get a call. My mom calls me and she says, "Hey, someone left a message for you at the house." Um, it and said she butchered William Morris, but I was like, "Do you possibly mean William Morris?" And so I call, and a woman answers, and she says, she explains that she was an assistant for the past 4 years. She just got bumped up to being an agent. She had zero clients
Hmm.
and was looking through the mailroom. And she said, I read everything in the
Hmm.
mailroom. I found your submission. And she said, I like it. She's like, would you have any interest in writing for TV or movies? And I said, yeah, of course I would. What do I have to do? And she said, you got to write a spec script, or at least one or two spec scripts, and I'll try to shop it around. That'll be your calling card, and we'll try to get you work.
For those unfamiliar with the industry, can you just explain what a spec script is?
Sure, a spec script is typically like a script for an existing show, or it can be a pilot, like a new show, or it can be a movie. It could kind of be a lot of things, but it's something that demonstrates your ability to write if you're trying to be a writer. And you want to get that script really polished, really good, and so that your agent could shop it around and send it to producers, to executives, and all that stuff. And you want to wow them with
Hmm.
your material so that they can start considering you for jobs.
Great. And you probably, I'm guessing, really didn't know the first thing about writing a spec script.
Nothing. Yeah, zero.
So what happened next?
So she mails me a bunch of scripts. She's like, here's some of our
Okay.
clients. And it was amazing. I remember getting that package, that thick package of like They sent me Seinfeld episodes. They sent me Frasier episodes, Spin City. As you could, I'm dating myself, like
Yeah,
what
yeah.
era
But
that.
were these actual scripts that were used on these shows that she
Yes,
sent you? Okay,
amazing.
so
They
got
were
it. So
amazing. Like I
basically, like
reckon.
study these and this is like
Yes,
what you want to try to emulate.
yes,
Okay.
exactly. And so I got those things. Those were like gold. Like,
Mm.
I knew those writers. Those are the writers I saw on screen, and they were William Morris clients.
Mm.
And
Wow, that must have been exciting. How old were you?
me, I was how old was I then? 24,
Mm.
25, yeah, maybe 25 years old. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I would pick up a script and like, this is the Frasier, dinner at 8, whatever. It was there were famous episodes. I'm like, oh my God, like I've seen that writer's
Mm.
name on TV, and this is amazing. And you would see where they were edited, and you could see where like it diverged from the final product.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Like, so these were the original scripts and not necessarily the finished product you saw on TV. So if you were familiar with the episode,
Yeah.
you would be able to gauge like what had been changed.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Like, but they had production, like, gibberish. Didn't mean anything, but like all these codes and stuff like that. They were produced scripts, like production scripts. So
Hmm.
they had all this other stuff, but it was really cool to see those.
Yeah.
But but yeah, that said, so I started to write a Seinfeld and I started to write a Frasier, and a couple weeks later, my agent calls me back and I'm like, you can't possibly expect me to be done. But she says, I didn't tell you this, but I forwarded your greeting cards to the Late Show with David Letterman, and they just called me and said they want to meet you. And how soon can you get up to New York?
Wow.
And
This
so
is the agent everybody wants.
this is the agent who has no clients, yeah, who
And
has
is
zero, who
motivated
is
to
totally motivated.
yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Now, okay. I mean, we're of a similar age, and certainly I remember staying up late and watching Letterman religiously. Uh, were you, like, what did David Letterman mean to you at this point in time? Were you already a fan? Like, what
yeah,
was what did this mean to you? This
yeah.
her saying that to you?
It was amazing. It was amazing. He was my favorite,
Mm.
like, hands down favorite
Mhm.
late night host. And probably one of the funniest, the one show, what else did I like back then? I mean, it was The Simpsons. It was probably The Simpsons and Seinfeld and Letterman. Like those were the shows that made me laugh, and I thought those were like the cream of the crop of comedy.
Mhm. I
And
agree. Yeah, that's for my favorites.
yeah, yeah, they were so fun, and I couldn't believe it. Like, wow, I'm not. Shouldn't I start at the bottom, like,
Mm,
like some show I've never heard of? Like that's what I was imagining. The best case scenario was when I'm writing my spec script. Like
right.
I'm gonna get on some like
Unknown.
unknown TV show, like maybe a comedy that's terrible that I would never want to watch. But to get hired on Letterman and to move up there, and
So what happened? You went the next day to
I went up the next day. It was like probably a 20-minute meeting. They were like,
huh.
they're like, these are funny. All of these are funny. And they're like, you want to work for us? And it was that casual. And I
Wow.
said, yeah, what do I got to do? They said, just show up, move here. And I was like,
Wow.
I remember I could not sleep for like 48 hours, like
Huh.
just could not shock out of what had happened. So I moved up there. Yeah. And
And so tell us about the experience of working in the writer's room. This is your first time working in, well, I mean, I'm guessing with the greeting cards, you probably were working in isolation, like you did your own cards. Is that right?
totally.
Now you're
Yeah.
part of a team and a very well-established team of writers. And what was your experience like? How did they give you, like, what assignments did you get? How did it work? What was your typical day?
Yeah. It was terrifying, honestly. Like once I digested like the amazingness of what happened, it was like terror. Like I knew like all those that writer's room had won so many Emmys, and part of it was a function that there was only like three late night talk shows. So in the scope of like Emmys, in the television world, to win a best comedy as a television show, you're competing with, 20 shows, if not 40 shows. But in the late night category, there's three. So Letterman was winning 2 out of every 3 years. So like every writer in that room,
Wow.
you walked past their office and it was just lined with Emmys. And they had all written for the Harvard Lampoon, and not everybody, but the majority of it. And it was a hugely intimidating
Wow.
writer's room. And a little thing, like for anyone going down this road, I remember walking in the door day one, hey, you're the new guy, Mark. And I walk past the writer's assistant table, and there was a stack. If you could see my hands, there was like a 1.5 foot high tall stack of top 10 lists that had been submitted by prospective writers. And I was like, I walk past it and I'm like, oh, that's why I got hired, is because I did something different.
Huh.
Like there was probably 300 submissions of top
10 lists, but you had these
greeting card, these
one
cartoons,
frame cartoons.
one
That
frame
is
cartoons.
right. So that differentiated you.
Yeah, I just cut through the
So those were unsolicited or maybe even solicited, who knows? But that was like, that was a testament to how many people wanted that gig and were submitting their own top 10 list. The top 10 list was such a huge touchstone culturally for people who watched that show, myself included. I mean, my friends and I, when for each other's birthdays, we would do top 10 lists in the style of the David Letterman show. So I did that for years. So I mean, that was really like a significant thing. And I'm sure you. So what were you asked to work on those? Like, what was the nature of writing for that show? Obviously, you had a deadline because it was daily.
Yeah, it was intense. I mean, it was intense for the deadlines. You had a show that had to, live. That audience was sitting in those seats at 5 p.m. and you got there at 10 a.m. and you had to write the whole show between now and
How
then.
many writers?
And there's probably like 9, maybe 8, something like that. Like, and some of them were just strictly monologue. There was maybe 2 or 3 guys that were strictly monologue. And then the rest of the staff was, the desk were the top 10 lists, the desk pieces, the remote, the remote things.
So they were filmed in advance, right? The remote things.
Yeah. And they had some other random video, kind of shooting that was done down man on the street things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's your day usually started with the top 10. Like it would just get slipped under your door, that day's top 10 topic. And you just kind of flew from there. You just get it and like, oh crap, let's go.
So someone was responsible for determining what the topic was, and then the writers would get to work and do it.
Exactly. And you'd probably have about 1 hour.
Wow. I'm guessing this must have been amazing for developing your chops, like having those deadlines and the stakes being so high.
Yeah.
This is actual, like this is going on the air.
Right.
Was it a thrill? Like, was there was it like a competitive environment for people? Like, I'm going to get my jokes included. And was there a one-upmanship attitude, or was it pretty collaborative, or both?
I think there was a lot of support. But I guess I bet at the same time, everybody wanted you checked, you couldn't wait to see
what Letterman
read the top 10 list, because you don't know what they picked until it's on air that night at 5 o'clock.
And then you could see how it goes over, right? Like,
you see how big of a laugh it got.
I can only imagine it must have been such a thrill if your joke gets a big laugh from Dave, right?
Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah. You were always watching, like, how did the audience take it? And yeah, how did Dave take it?
And how were you judged by whoever was, in the position of managing you? Like, was there an expected, was it based on output? Was it based on the quality of your work? Like, do you have any idea, how they gauged your contributions?
I'm not sure. I mean, there was not much communication. Like, everybody was supportive. Like, it was a good room. Everybody was friendly. Um, but unlike my experience on Family Guy, where we're all in a room together, this one, where you'd go into your office, and for that first hour is like, here comes, under your door comes the topic for today, top 10 list, go.
Hmm.
It was like you were under the gun, and like, try to generate, easily, try to generate 10 options for that specific topic. And then that goes into the head writer's, you put it into his like mail slot on his door, and then you get moving to the next thing, and the next thing is like, we need a desk piece. And sometimes we'd go in for the afternoon and like all be as a group, um and be pitching on whatever it was. Like, one of my favorite moments one of my favorite moments of the show was like when Chris Farley like
Hmm.
came in, and if you could find that if that's on YouTube anywhere, his entrance
Hmm.
was one of the most hilarious entrances ever. Like, he just was spaz. I don't know, like,
I
he
think I've
comes
seen that.
running
Yeah.
through. Do
I think I
you
remember that. Yeah.
He picks up one guy, runs out the door, throws him in the dumpster, and then like runs back in, and he's just going wild. And then he sits down next to Letterman because he's the guest, and like, he can't catch his breath for like
Yeah.
for
Now,
like
as far like how much
10
of that
minutes.
is scripted in advance, or does how much, that has to, I mean, obviously there has to be some awareness on the part of the
Yeah,
production team.
yeah. I think, like, I wasn't part of the planning of that. Like, I don't know. Maybe they did that during rehearsal. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know. There was always like, maybe the head writer was talking to, the producers, like, hey, we got Farley coming in here. He wants to do some skit, and maybe they talked with him, and maybe Farley suggested it. Like,
It seems certainly very spontaneous and very him. So who
right,
knows?
let me
Yeah.
do the craziest entrance ever
Ever. Yeah.
on anything. And yeah, and then we gotta plant, we gotta find a someone in the audience that he's gonna pick up. He's gonna go
Right.
ballistic, like running through the crowd, and then he's gonna pick up a guy, sling him over his shoulder, and then run out the door. And then the
Just for
camera's got
liability purposes, that obviously needed to be
right.
to be planned.
They
So
run
it's
out
interesting.
the door, and they throw him into a dumpster.
Wow.
So funny.
So it's interesting. It sounds like the majority of the work there you did independently, and it was only occasionally you came together as a team. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was there was a balance, but there was enough of it that it was part of the template of the show, and you could go into your office and maybe brainstorm.
Yeah.
But
So
all yeah.
I don't know how long you imagined when you had this gig. You were probably pinching yourself for a while that you were actually doing this. Um, how long did it last? How long did you expect it to last? And what came next? Because this is a really interesting part of your personal journey. But
Sure. So I when I got there, I was like, this would have been the type of job that I would have expected to work for a decade, or maybe more, maybe 2 decades, and hope to arrive at a premium, just a show like that is one of my favorites to get on. But to get on that early was amazing. I was there for about a year, in like almost a year and a half, and yeah, it was and eventually, like, I got caught in the late night talk show wars of those, like the late 90s. And we, Letterman had slipped in the ratings, and it was big news, if you remember that. There was a lot of media attention to the late night talk show wars.
Mhm.
And when Letterman slipped, they fired the longtime executive producer and brought in a new one, and there was a lot of changes. And there was an old guard kind of there that was untouchable, and so it was the newer writers
They were the tenured ones, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I, my number came up, and one morning I just come in, and I think it was right after we were at the Emmys, and we had won Emmys, and it was like the Monday morning, hey, we're letting you go.
No notice, like that was your.
Yeah, it was very abrupt, and I was like, oh my God, what a punch in the face.
Wow. So yeah, tell me about that moment. Tell me about, because now we're hearkening back to the Tough-Minded Optimist, at least, right?
Right.
So you, first of all, what was your response, your reaction, to this like sudden, all like firing from your dream job, basically,
Yeah.
without any warning?
Yeah.
Tell me about what that felt like, and then importantly, what you decided to do with that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, boy, that came out of the blue. Like, I thought, from day one, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like,
Hmm.
I'm from Cleveland, like, what am I doing in this room? How did I get here? But yeah, I was working my ass off. Always like, I don't know. I think just ingrained. I work very hard around myself, even from high school, grade school, college. I could outwork anybody. And
Hmm.
I liked it. I enjoy the grind. I enjoy going after stuff. And that's part of the fun of life.
Hmm.
But yeah, I come in that day, and just within like 5 minutes, like, hey, thanks, but we're making changes and you're out. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And so I thanked them, thank you
Hmm.
for the giving me this amazing opportunity. And I got my backpack and walked out the door, and I was just like, whoa. like, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna tell, like, part of it was like, what am I gonna tell my family and my friends? They made such a big deal out of it. Like, when
Hmm.
you hear Mark Hentemann got hired on Letterman, and there was like, no way, that's impossible. How does that happen?
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, like, what happened? Like, it's almost better. It would have been better if I never got hired,
Oh.
to like now have to go back with my tail between my
Hmm.
legs. Like, and what am I going to do? And it's just devastating, and I walked out onto Broadway, left the Ed Sullivan Theater. And typically I would take a bus or a subway, but I just walked. I just started walking, just in this daze,
Hmm.
and just felt terrible. Like, I'm a pretty optimistic guy in general, and I had that sort of experience of like knowing that mindset is an
Hmm.
important thing. But I was just like, I was lost and just devastated, and walking. I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I remember drifting from my body and looking down on myself like this pathetic guy walking down, Broadway, and in morning rush hour, I think it still was,
Huh.
amongst the throngs of people. And I just hated it. And I felt like shit. And finally, I, like, kind of looked down on myself as this pathetic thing. And I'm like, fuck that. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get better than everyone. You know, I'm going to, whatever it takes, I'm going to get better than every writer in that room. And maybe the prelude to that was like, I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this. This came too easy for me. And I'm not in the league of these other writers that were in there. And it's failure. You're confronted, punched in the face with like this rejection and failure. And I was pissed. Eventually, like that was something I latched onto. Instead of being wallowing in my sort of patheticness, I got pissed. I'm like, fuck that. I believe 1,000% that you make your own success, like that you make your own talent, and that I believed I could get better than every writer in that room because I saw their work ethic. Like I saw everyone's work ethic in that room, and I knew that I could work twice as hard as what they were doing. Like they were complacent. The guys who had been there for a long time, they left.
It was a cushy gig for them.
It was a cushy gig, and they weren't pushing their creative, chops. And I would do that. And I'm like, I'll focus. I can focus. I've always been able to focus, and I'll lock in and I'll understand comedy. Like there was a lot I didn't know. I knew how to write cartoons. I know how to draw cartoons, and I got good at that because I spent 6 to 8 years doing that. And I, writing top 10 lists was a little bit of a different muscle, and some of those things were different muscles. And obviously, like writing scripts was another muscle that I had to learn. But I always believed 1,000% you could learn it. I can learn it. I'll deconstruct it. And that's what I was like, fuck that. I want to be, that's what's going to be my burning thing is I'm going to get better than every one of those writers in that like Emmy loaded writer's room. And that's going to be my shining goal. And I, marched home. I'm like, that's what I'm doing.
Wow.
And, next morning I was up at 6 a.m., and deconstructing every joke, every story, every plot turn, every character. I wanted to go deep, very, very deep, and understand why it was good when it was good and why it was bad when it was bad.
Wow. So it's, first of all, thank you for sharing that. That is really powerful. And there's a couple things and pieces of that. One, you talk about this sort of out of body experience where you were able to observe yourself and rather than just being lost in the natural response that I think most humans would have of feeling gut punched and probably shocked and a little bit self-pitying, right?
Yeah.
But that ability to have that like sort of piece of yourself looking from objectively outside. I know that, I experienced some pretty severe depression in my 20s. And I always felt that my saving grace was that there was a part of me that was able, most of the time, there was one occasion where it didn't happen and that really frightened me. but most of the time, there was a part of me that was able to be separate enough from my situation and my misery to be able to recognize that it was temporary. However miserable I felt, there was a part of me that it didn't stop me from feeling miserable, but it was my saving grace. I think that to like a tiny bit of perspective was always available or usually available, that this too shall pass. Right.
Yeah. Oh,
And
wow. That's great.
yeah. And so that ability, I think, to sort of distance yourself and look at things from another perspective. And I love that you took this, what easily could have been like, screw this. And I never should have been here. And I'm just going to, whatever, like it fueled determination for you.
Yeah. It ignited me immediately. And that was exciting. I was like, this is how I'm going to embrace this is
Yeah.
like, this is going to be my challenge. And, there was the humiliation to it. And also like, yeah, like I mentioned, I think that, they made a big deal of it. Like at first when I was wallowing, it was like, why did I would have been better off if I never had this opportunity because, everyone in Ohio like knew about it. It was in the media that I like a guy
Local kid makes good.
local kid makes local kid makes good, and now I'm going to go back home. Like I was like, it would have been better if this never happened. And then it was just like, yeah, that was. And then when I saw myself just this pathetic figure, I'm like, fuck that. Like I'm not going down that road. And like that's my thing. It's like I'll get better than them, and that'll be my sort of like that will fuel me and that will get me excited. I'll jump out of bed in the morning because I can't wait to like get better.
So this is like the Rocky montage where he's training for the big fight. Like, so how did you, because it sounds like you all sort of assigned yourself this curriculum of like, I'm going to master this craft. I'm going to get better at it than anyone has ever been. And you recognize that there was some study needed to deconstruct and understand what made things work and what was, why something didn't work. How did you even know where to begin? Did you literally self-educate? And if so, what did you study?
Yeah, yes, I went home and I had a VCR or whatever the machine was at the time, but like yeah, I collected like, okay, what are the funniest movies? What are the funniest TV shows? And I started making a library of it, even the best episodes. Like I remember deconstructing, some of those Frasier episodes that were like brilliant, and the Seinfeld and the Simpsons, and every show that I liked. Yeah, I just sat there with a pause button and I would go like watch the first minute of it. Okay, why was this decision made, and why is this the choice? And then it became like every joke, like why does that joke work? Why is that character interesting? I remember even going deep on like Al Bundy, like why is Al Bundy so funny? Like, and then I would like sort of make a list because here's his flaws. And it's not just one flaw, it's not just two flaws. Al Bundy is a funny character because he's got like 21 flaws. Like you could list like everything that is wrong with him. and you just kind of parse out every aspect of every moment, in every aspect of either a television show or movies. Like I went, and it was enjoyable. Like part of it's you're getting to watch your favorite shows, your favorite movies, and just trying to pause and just reflect, like why does that work? Why does that not work? And what are they doing? That's below the surface? What are the story structure dynamics happening right now? And is it building tension? Am I laughing because the tension is high? Like, I just wanted to know everything.
How long did you spend in seclusion educating yourself like this?
Easily a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you work odd jobs, or how did you, sustain yourself during
I don't know. I don't know what I did.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I was burning through my savings.
Right.
And I think I had any other jobs. So my girlfriend at the time, she's my wife now, she moved up to New York, and she was working, but she didn't have any money for me. She couldn't support me. She got me a job as a bowling pin, and I was in Central. I was like a 10-foot tall in a bowling pin outfit, walking around Central Park, handing out flyers for a bowling alley.
Wow.
But that was just like a temporary thing. But mainly, I was just burning through my savings. And I was bolting awake in the middle of the night, being like, "Holy shit, how am I going to survive?" I'm in trouble. I'm going to be in trouble.
One thing that's really interesting is that you decided to put all of your focus on craft, and you were going to, make yourself just like, as good as you possibly could be and understand comedy and writing as well as you possibly could. But also, and that's one important piece, but there's also navigating the business, right? Like another person might have said, screw getting better. They might have thought they were good enough. And like, I'm going to like, work the networking thing, but you really put all of your eggs in the craft basket. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering just your thoughts about that. And what about, like marketing yourself and that kind of thing? Did that, take up any real estate, which is a good segue coming up
Right.
in your
Right.
brand, or were you just felt like if I'm great at this, then I'll get the work?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been kind of a bad networker. Maybe it's my introverted sort of tendencies, but I just wanted to get get as good as I could get, be the best at it. I mean, that was that was from the sort of sting of that writer's room, is like I wanted to show, because I knew there was no doubt in my mind that going to Harvard does not make you a good writer, and a good comedy writer, especially. And I could rewire my brain to understand, and it's just time on task. I 100% believed that anybody could be the best if they put enough concentration and effort into it. So that was all I've ever done. My whole career, I've never been a great networker.
So you trusted that being good enough would compensate for whatever you were lacking in that department.
Yeah, and if I wasn't good, I'd feel like the emperor has no clothes. Like I'd be a fraud, and
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a fraud. I wanted to be the best at the craft.
Your comment about Harvard not necessarily meaning anything in terms of being a good comedy writer reminds me of an old Simpsons moment when they had the Itchy and Scratchy show was a cartoon that within the Simpsons show,
Right.
and it was staffed by a whole bunch of Harvard comedy writers. I don't know if you remember this, and their boss is barking at them, and the one comedy writer is like, back at Harvard, and he's like, back at Harvard, he's like, you should have majored in not getting fired. So anyway,
That's hilarious.
yeah. So after the year of, the Rocky montage, like getting serious,
Right.
like, really getting, mastering your craft, what happened next for you?
It was like, yeah, it was a Rocky montage, and it motivated me. It was such a better path to go down than pathetic and feeling rejected and sad and going back to Cleveland. Like, it was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. It's do or die time. So yeah, I did that for easily a year, and I was checking in, like I was a bad networker. I was kind of, like I said, I needed to be good. I was always it was part of insecurity was driving it too. Is like I'm not good. Like I need to be better than, even though I put in, 10,000 hours now, I still need to go back and dig more, understand more. There was never no end in it. It was like, you could do this endlessly. So I was doing that. And maybe occasionally my agent was checking in on me and saying, yeah, we're still looking. And finally I think I was at my wit's end after like a year, about a year, maybe a little more. And I call my agent. I'm like, I think I must have looked at my bank account, probably had, $300 left, and maybe $800 of my share of the apartment rent coming due. And I call my agent. I'm like, I'm at wit's end. If I don't find something, we can't find work, I got to go back. Like there's no jobs here. I don't know what to do except to go back to Cleveland. And she goes, well, she's like, the problem is there's only like 3 shows that are produced in New York. If you want to stay in this business, you should really think about moving to LA, because that's where 99% of the business is. And I, as dumb as I was like, I
Now
wish
you
you would
tell
have
me.
told me that a year ago. Like, are you serious? There's only 3 places. And she's like, yeah, it was
And
like
she was
Saturday
only
at
looking
5.
for you. She was only looking in New York on your behalf.
Yeah. I mean,
Ah,
she got me some like spotty, sort of like punch up stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why we never had that conversation.
hmm.
Like, why didn't she tell me right away, move to LA? But anyway, it did what it did, and it put me in a room by myself for easily, 12 months, maybe a year and a half. And I developed a lot, I mean, a lot of my development happened
Hmm.
during them. Definitely knew dramatic structure. I definitely knew comedy dynamics, like all those things that you don't learn as somebody imitating Gary Larson. um,
It
so
was a
yeah,
deeper level understanding. Yeah.
yeah, in a slightly different form,
Medium. Yeah.
a different medium. Yeah, I had a sense of maybe I had a sense of humor, but you still got to learn the mechanics.
Yeah. That's really important, isn't it? Like that's kind of like talent can only get you so far. You really have to know your craft, whatever that craft happens to be.
Right. 100%.
And so when you did move to LA, and in the interest of time, we're going to speed things up a little bit. When you did move to LA, um, you were prepared.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, when I got to LA, my agent says, great. You just missed the hiring season. When I moved out to LA, and I was like, oh, great. She said, all the shows are staffed up, but you've got these greeting cards. And so I'm going to call you an animator. And I'm like, I've never animated anything in my life, but yeah, whatever you got to do. So she says, Fox has animation. I'm going to try to get you a meet and greet over at Fox. And so I was like, okay. And I prepared for it. I sketched out some characters for a show idea that I had. I had a lot of ideas when I was in my crappy New York apartment, and I sort of jotted them down, and so I drew some characters to that. Went into this meeting, and and I showed them the characters, and they liked them. They thought they're funny. And I pitched the show to them. I'm like, this is kind of what I conceive, like I picture with this show being. And they're like, they were kind of laughing, and they were nice. I mean, they were great. I was like, wow, West
Hmm.
Coast executives are easy. they're pushovers. And after our meeting, they said, oh, you should really meet this guy who's doing a new show for us. He's a young guy. He's an animator like you. And I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, that's right. I'm an animator. And that was Seth MacFarlane. And I met with Seth, and we had a good, we had a good meeting, and he liked all my cartoons. I guess my agent had sent my cartoons to him, and he loved Far Side, and
Hmm.
we just started talking for a long time. And he's like, you should come work on this new show I'm doing called Family Guy. And I said, okay, I don't know anything about it. But yeah, I go back to my apartment, and my agent goes like, she called me that night, and she goes, what did you do at that meeting? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, that was supposed to be a meet and greet, like just a nothing, meet and greet. They want to buy the series that you pitched them.
Huh,
And they
wow.
also want you to join Family Guy as a writer. And, they were like, they're talking about combining it into a development deal. And she's like, that's unheard of. Like, you're an unknown,
Hmm.
um, and I guess, I was like, I'll take anything, at this point. But, it's like, wow, like, I guess my time, all that hard work, all that focus, all that sort of like development, that I focused on seemed to have paid off.
Hmm. Wow. What for you in hindsight, looking back, are the true takeaways because, you can only really understand this stuff in hindsight, right?
Right.
Like, in the moment, you're just trying to find your way. But things, it's for you, they really did work out in a long-term way, in ways you could not have orchestrated yourself. So looking back, what do you think were the sort of pivotal lessons or takeaways, or what would you tell your younger self, even like as you were going through your hardships, um, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I think knowing what I know now is maybe I would pay a little more attention to networking. And when I got out to LA, and now still, like, I've been in the business here for almost 25 years. I'm always baffled that, like, when I was the new guy in LA, like, and in that sort of that pool of other, people trying to break into the industry, I would say like 80% of them were focused on networking. Like, who can I meet? Who can I go have coffee with? Who can I get a PA job? And none of that was on my radar. That was never my thought. It was always, I gotta be great at the craft. And it was all about the craft. So I think that's my advice to anybody that I run into. You want to get into this industry, you 100% can. Like,
Hmm.
I don't believe that much in talent. Get good, put in your time, put in your 10,000 hours, deconstruct everything. Like, if you want to get in the entertainment business, line up all of your favorite shows and then deconstruct them and go very deep. Like, deconstruct them 10 times in a row, and you'll always find something, some
Hmm.
new insight on what a conflict, that's underlying it all, or what, just the mechanics. Break down the mechanics. It's like you're a mechanic taking apart an engine and putting it back together,
Hmm.
and to see how everything works together. And that's what
Yeah.
I say. I say, you do that for 10,000 hours and you're going to be good.
Right. And of course, that understanding will then serve as a vehicle for your own ideas and creativity, because you can't just simply copy. I mean,
Oh,
you
definitely.
can incorporate um, the understanding, but then it has to serve your own kind of quirky,
Yeah,
creative impulses, right? And
right.
give them some meat and some form.
Right. Like, so you're not copying the joke or whatever, or the story, but it's your understanding of the mechanics of it all, which allows you to, um kind of use whatever vehicle you want to express your humor, your comedic bent. um and just that, you having that understanding of the mechanics is going to allow you to tell 1,000 different stories, or
Hmm.
tell a lot of different kind of jokes.
Right. I want to talk about your pivot into real estate, which has been a parallel career of sorts for you.
Yeah,
But also amazingly, I just want to point out that you said you've been in the business, the entertainment business, for about close to 25 years. And if I'm not mistaken, with a couple of cancellations thrown in there early
yeah,
on,
yeah,
you have worked specifically on Family Guy all this time, right?
yeah. I've created a couple shows during that time, and I left for a show called Border Town that was on Fox for maybe a year and a half, maybe almost two. But otherwise, yeah, I started on Family Guy in 1999, and yeah, still on it.
And that's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a rarity, right? I mean,
Oh,
just
amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
Very rare.
Yeah. So explain how you got into, of all things, real estate. What was the initial impetus for that? And I'm sure you never would have predicted what it would become in your life.
Yeah, when I moved out to LA, it was, and landed in LA. I'd never been to LA in my life, except I think we went to the Emmy Awards at Letterman. But so I was in this strange new city, expensive city, and I and I was looking for a way to survive because that, my destitute years in New York City scarred me. I mean, I was so broke. Like I literally every single week I bought a like 10-pound box of dried lentils from like the bodega downstairs, which I could get for like $4. And I would make a gigantic pot of like lentils. And I was eating for maybe 40 cents a day in New York. And I did that for a year, which is completely ridiculous. But like moving to LA, like I was like, I got to survive. Like that's very important to me. So
Survival important, yes.
yes. And I, I was still scarred by like how quickly great luck could turn bad. And I was waiting like, okay, when is this going to happen next? Like, what's the next show I'm going to get on? And then just get the rug pulled out from underneath me. So my first, and I wasn't 100% sure Family Guy was going to last, but I was hired on Family Guy and I used my first 2 script payments and I bought a duplex. And part of that was I met a broker and I was explaining to her my concern about, I'm in this volatile industry. I don't know, if I'm going to survive. She wanted me to buy a house. Like, I think I ran into her somewhere and she's like, you should buy a house. Like you have made, you're making pretty good money on this new show. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You think I want the obligation of a house? And I said, the only way I would ever buy any kind of real estate is like, it would have to be the best investment I'd ever made. Otherwise I'm happy, like just renting, get a 1-bedroom apartment. And so she goes, she was great. Her name is June On, and she's still a broker out here. And she goes, I'll find you something. And she goes, I'll find you a fixer upper if you're willing to put in the work. And that could be, and so I said, sure, whatever. And she showed me a duplex that needed a bunch of work. And so we put an offer in, and I was still nervous about it, but, and then there was a bidding war, and I think there was like 15 buyers, and she kept pushing like, it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. And eventually I won the bidding war. And that was it. So I've got this duplex that I had bought, and I thought I made the biggest mistake of my life. Like, oh my God, what a financial disaster I just got myself into. Because, Family Guy maybe will get canceled. And it did, obviously. It got canceled a couple times in those early years. But yeah, Mike, my tenant was Mike Henry, who is the voice of Cleveland, Herbert, Consuela, the greased up deaf guy. And he was next door, and that was fun having him next door. I threatened to evict him. He made fun of me for being a landlord. But it was a good time in the market. I bought in 1999, sold in 2005. I bought it for, let me see, 439,000 and sold it for 1.27 million after fixing it up. And I 1031 exchanged, all those proceeds. They went right into a new deal, tax free. And I was like blown away. I was like, this is the greatest thing in the world. Like, this is my survival. This is what I'm going to do to survive in this business.
Fascinating.
And I'm going to do this and I did. I mean, it was immediate. It was like I had no interest in a fancy car or any of the
trappings of
Hollywood.
Right.
I wanted every dime, the scars of my, my own Great Depression era were still fresh. And so I just pumped everything into real estate. And, eventually I built a big portfolio. My writing friends, who I was also always preaching like, hey, do yourself a favor, invest in real estate, like get into investments. Don't be a dumb Hollywood guy who's driving around in a Porsche, and none of them would go to the length that I did. So I became a syndicator for for my writing friends, and those were my first investors. And now fast forward, I know I'm
No, it's
floating
it's
on,
no, it's good.
but yeah, now we got a couple hundred million in assets, and
Wow.
those aren't just mine. Those are our. I started a company called Quantum Capital, and we invest in LA, Austin, Texas, and Denver, and it's great. I mean, I love doing it alongside a career in Hollywood.
Would you have ever imagined even having an interest in real estate prior to that encounter with the broker who made that recommendation to you, do you think?
Not really, although one of my best friends growing up, his dad was a real estate guy in Cleveland, and sometimes my friend was always going to these apartments, and he had to do work there, and I would help him. That was some exposure to it, but I think I was I felt blind going into that first duplex purchase, but I just trusted this woman, June On, and I kept looking at her like, you really think this is okay? Okay, I'm following your lead.
My life is in your
Your
hands.
life, yeah, totally. My life was in her hands, and she pulled off quite a, it ended up to be, what a great return on that investment. I'm like, wow, this is the thing. This is the thing. I'm gonna do this with, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I could immediately saw like, yeah, this isn't something that goes for the next 10, 20 years. This is something I'm going to be buying apartment buildings when I'm 100.
Okay, so I imagine that I don't know how analogous or analogous this is to the entertainment industry, but I would imagine that a lot of people are gung-ho about real estate and diving in, and they, probably a lot of people feel like this is a get rich quick thing or whatever they think.
Yeah,
I know that there's a lot of appeal, like, there's always, seminars and stuff that are always filled up for people who are interested in real estate as a means of passive income or what have you. And what percentage of those people have consistent success? I don't know, because I'm not familiar with that world, but I would bet or imagine that, it's still is, I don't know, there's risk, obviously.
yeah, yeah, a lot of risk. I mean, the longer you're in it, the more like kind of crash and burns you see
Yeah.
happening.
So it's just funny to me that you chose as a stabilizing mechanism for your entertainment career this other business that by, some measures is equally volatile or
Right,
risky, right?
right.
But you didn't see it that way, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, the whole time I owned that first duplex, and I owned it for 5 years, I wasn't sure, I a story I kind of will say to some people getting in is like, I was so fixated on, Mike, my next door neighbor, my tenant. I remember Mike's dishwasher broke, and I was like, I walked over there. I'm like, oh God, this is going to cost me like $280 to get a new dishwasher. This was a mistake. I remember like, so like,
Yeah.
what a mistake. Why did I buy a duplex? Like now I got to pay for this dishwasher next door. But I didn't, I wasn't aware, of the other sort of mechanisms of, I was paying down my loan. I was benefiting from appreciation because that area was like increasing, and I caught a pretty good time during the market, and there are bad times, like when you got to go, you might have 4 years of growth, of value growth, and then you'll go through 3 years of decline, and you just
You have
got to
to ride that out.
you got to ride that out. It's a
Yeah.
long-term thing.
Right. I just love that you've had these two parallel careers and you've enjoyed success. And, of course, there's always luck is always an ingredient in life, but, it sounds like you've been very focused and determined, and you've managed to succeed in two really interesting and different, and I imagine that they stimulate you in very different ways, enterprises. And I think it's very cool that you've just, been able to exercise different interests and succeed in different realms, and I'm sure there probably are some transferable skills, but they're pretty different, pretty different industries.
Right.
One important question I want to ask, and before we wrap up, is I think that an important part of success, however a person defines success, and I'll be interested to hear how you do actually. Maybe we'll start there. How do you personally define success for yourself?
I think at this point, I am 54 years old. I think, it's always evolving. I think it's, am I serving something greater than myself? And am I healthy?
Huh. Wow.
And am I spending time with my kids?
Mhm.
Those are the three.
That's great. Those are great metrics.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't really care about, I would like to say I'm obsessed with the next building purchase or the next show. I'm so lucky to be on Family Guy, which is kind of like a family to me.
yeah.
They're my buddies. I don't want to leave. I don't want to create any more shows. Um, it's like you get into your 50s and I've read, I heard this long before I got to 50s. I heard that like when you're in your 50s, it's one of the happiest decades of your life for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And and I think that's kind of true because you got a lot behind you, like I've kind of done stuff. I've done enough that I don't beat myself up about. Um, and you got good friends and I think you're just like, all right, I got hopefully 30, 40, 50 more years. And I don't think I'm going to go hungry and I got some great friends and I got I love my family and I want to spend some quality time with them and just enjoy things. And I don't
Right.
get stressed anymore. I don't have the anxiety that I
Mm.
had for a lot of my middle age. Like it just kind of, there's this, I listened to a podcast and this was, I know we got to wrap it up, but it was like a psychologist for the NFL and the US Olympic team. And he's just talking about elite athletes. And he was talking about like if you're in the Super Bowl and he's been a psychologist on a Super Bowl sideline, and he's like, you've got 1 billion people watching worldwide that the stadium is deafening. It's like you can't hear a word, and like you're standing on the sidelines like ready to go. And he said like, I'm always looking, like as a coach and as a psychologist, I'm looking for those players who are on that sideline, like during the national anthem, who are kind of like leaning slightly forward and like kind of nodding their head, like, I got this, we got this, we got this, and like arms locked with their comrades. And it's like, I sort of took that vision away. I'm like, that's what life should be, is like,
Mm.
it's not like anxiety, like, oh my God, this is terrifying.
Right.
It's like you got to nod and just lean a little bit forward and just say, I got this. And even when I go up on stage, like I sort of think about that. Like, what am I doing on this stage? Like, I got to give a speech for 40 minutes. How am I possibly going to get through this? But you just sort of like, let's just try that little game of just nod your head and say, I got this.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great image and a great, summation of an attitude, because I think the same physical experience of anxiety, and this is maybe not, 100%, but just bear with me here. Maybe it's not universally applicable, but I think often when we have nervous energy, that same physical experience that some people think of as anxiety can also be framed as excitement. And I know that I've done a lot of performing in my life, and the nerves that you feel before you get on stage, and even after doing it for a long time, part of me is like, really, still, like,
Right.
I've done this, I can do this. But that nervous energy is the way I interpret it now. Is it you only feel that way when you really care about something. When
Yeah.
when you're bored and you're checked out, you don't feel that way. But when something is important to you, you do, like, there is that nervous energy, and you can look at it, you can panic and go down the anxiety version of that, or you can embrace it and look at it as excitement. And I don't know if this is exactly the same thing that you're talking about with that forward, like, looking, we got this kind of attitude. But it's like you're alive. It reminds you you're alive as opposed to just a zombie. And so I think that when you're having that experience, if you can have the presence of mind to view it as exciting, and to realize, like, I get to do this. I get to have this experience right now. It's not going to be forever. And here I am, and, like, let's be alive.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Like, let's embrace it. Bring it on.
Bring it on. Right.
And it's almost, you got to kind of trick your brain. I think,
Yeah.
like my natural innate proclivity is not confidence. It's anxiety.
Yep.
And you just got to, like, sort of, you do that, and yeah, it's like, bring it on. You trick yourself. You say,
It's
hey,
kind of fake it till you make it, right?
fake
Like,
it till you make it.
you make the decision, like, I'm going to pretend as if I'm confident, and let's do it.
Let's do it.
So yeah, just one last question. First of all, thank you, Mark, so much for this amazing insight into this world that, for most people is such a foreign. People have all these romantic ideas about, Hollywood and entertainment. And of course, they need to be tempered with reality. And I think you did a good job of giving us a flavor of that. But I really appreciate just all of the sort of behind the scenes insights and personal stories and shares. So thank you immensely for everything you've shared with us today.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on.
Actually, two last questions. The first, real quick. The first is, what role? So I'm curious about, you described your then girlfriend, now wife, and she's really accompanied you on this journey, really from college to the present.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what her, what her experience was as you navigated these kind of scary transitions. I'm just curious as to, like, how that relationship has factored into these various life paths and decisions, both with entertainment and real estate, and of course, parenthood. And then also
Yeah.
the role of, of support systems in general, because I think it's as determined as we might decide to be, having some kind of support and having another outside of ourselves believe in us, I think personally is really essential. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. She was, I moved up to New York, and we were dating. We had been dating for a bit. And then she followed me when I was up there, maybe like 6 months after I was there. Yeah. And then she was there for all, the trauma of Letterman, and then me sitting in that apartment, that crappy apartment, doing my thing. And she was in PR. She had gotten a job in PR in New York. I don't know that it helped me, like, pay my rent. But it was great to have her there. Just I had, it was a relief, almost a friendship. It was, I had friends there. I had known a couple people from college. So I had a good, like, while I was destitute, my friends, the guy friends, made fun of me. They're like, Hentemann doesn't have two nickels to rub together. But I always had some, like, social support in my wife and a couple of my good friends in New York that were there for me. But yeah, and yeah, my wife, we ended up getting married. We moved to LA so shortly after I made that move to LA, we decided, I was like, I dragged you up to New York, and now you followed me out to LA. Like, yeah, let's it's time. And so we got married. Yeah, we have 3 kids.
Nice. What advice do you give, or would you give to your kids having lived the particular life you have, as they come of age and have to make decisions about career and such things?
I think it's kind of the stuff that we talked about. I think it's like I would want my kids to have, to be mentally strong, like have optimism. Like I would want their default to be optimism instead of pessimism. And I would want them to be realistic about the challenges, but then go for it. Like go for what you want in life, and yeah, just no, it's not. It might not be easy, but if you stick to it and work hard,
Yeah.
you'll succeed.
Yeah, and you'll at least have the satisfaction of knowing that you gave it, like, you did what you wanted, you went after what you wanted, you gave it your best shot. A previous guest that I had on the show, episode 2, actually, his name is Eric Mazel, and he phrased this in a way that is just, it really resonates with me. He says that basically the thing we're after in life is we want to make ourselves proud. We want to make ourselves proud by our efforts. And I love that because it's about seizing the agency that we have. There's so much we have no say over: timing, luck,
Right.
randomness, good fortune, bad fortune. But the one
Right.
thing we can do is seize our agency in any given situation and behave, act in the world in such a way as to make ourselves proud of the way we conducted ourselves and the things that we did, the things we went after, the choices we made, the risks we took on behalf of things that mattered to us. So
Yeah.
I think that is
I love that.
yeah. Last question for you, Mark, which is just, at this junction in your life, 54 years old, who is the person you want to be now, having all of this behind you? You're looking ahead. I understand that you're working on a new Naked Gun movie. Is that right? With Liam Neeson?
Sure. Yeah. I wrote a draft of this the Naked Gun, if you guys remember that. I loved that franchise. And Seth MacFarlane was interested in rebooting it, and he asked me if I would write it, and I wrote it with a partner, Alex Salkin, who's also a writer on Family Guy. I asked him to come join, write it with me, and yeah, we rewrote a draft. It's at Paramount, and I'm sure it'll go through. It's my first foray into the movie world, so I don't know what to expect. I know other feature writers, and I know that it's a journey. You got to get the studio on board. You got to get the right director and all those pieces that have to fall into place. But I wrote it, and it was a blast writing it, especially with my friend Alec, and we turned it in, and and like everything I ever finish, I'm glad to let it go and say, I hope Seth shepherds it onto the screen, the big screen, because I want to see it, but I don't want to be involved with any more of the work.
Your work is done. Yeah, you've done your. Yeah.
I'm happy my work is done.
So was it green lit, or were you submitting it, like, was it commissioned, so to speak? Like, did they know they were going to do this project and you were hired to write it, or was it something that you wrote in the hopes that it would be green lit?
No, it was I think it started from Seth, and he has a production company called Fuzzy Door, and he was interested in rebooting the Naked Gun, and of course he's interested in that. I've spent 20 years in the writer's room with him, and we always quote we quote Naked Gun. It's one of the classics. So he had approached me and said, like, I'm interested in doing this. And so one of the first things we did is we did a meeting with Paramount, and all the executives were there. Seth was there, and I think he brought all the big guns from Paramount into that meeting. And they said, we're on board. We want to reboot this too. And so we were feeding, Paramount the outline and kind of the basic structure. And we did a couple drafts of the script, and now it's and honestly, like I was happy to like let it go, like get it through the pipeline. So it's somewhere in the pipeline. I think they've got a director, and they're just putting the pieces together, and then they'll have to schedule it. And it's my first time in the movie, producing a movie, so I don't really know. I just hear it's
Yeah, it's pretty exciting though. I saw on IMDb that Liam Neeson was attached to it. So
yes,
so I mean, that's pretty cool. And that he's playing Leslie Nielsen's character's son. Is that right? Did I read that right?
I think it's Frank. Oh, okay. Okay. I got it. Yeah. So that's that's the logic.
Okay. I don't know.
That wasn't in our script, but
interesting.
maybe it's Frank Drebin's son. Okay.
That's what it said, I think, on IMDb,
but we did know from day one, like when Seth came to me, this is what Seth said, is he calls me and he goes, and he had done the Western, A Million Ways to Die in the West. Seth had directed that movie, and Liam Neeson was the villain in that movie. It came out, I don't know, it was maybe 10 years ago or something. And Seth calls me and he goes, hey, Liam Neeson called me and said, I'm sick of doing these thrillers. Find me a comedy. And Seth like just immediately goes, you should be Frank Drebin. Do the Naked Gun. He goes, I'm in.
Wow.
And so that's where it started. And then yeah, I think, so he's attached to act. And I think we went through a couple directors. So I don't really know. I'm happily oblivious to like
right.
I'm done with my part. Like they'll tell me when
when
it's shooting.
So anything else that's alive for you or looking forward in terms of how you want to, live your life moving on at this point, moving forward from here? Any thoughts that come to mind about the person you want to be now?
The person I want to be now? I mean, I would hope that, I like community. I think at this point it's important. I like, it's important to me to get outside your own ego and make sure you're serving, something greater than yourself. Yeah, so that's, I don't know, you got your kids, you want to raise them well and then, yeah, have good friends. I like, especially we're on strike and I think
writers.
Part of the favorite thing about going to Family Guy anymore is my friends,
the people you get to hang out with all day,
to show up and who's going to make fun of you that day, and you're going to make fun of them back.
That's awesome. Mark Hentemann, thank you so much. And in the show notes, I will include whatever you would like me to include to direct people toward your work and also to Quantum Capital and your podcast and anything else. So we'll put that in the show notes. And it's been a real pleasure and joy to have this conversation with you. I just want to once again just say thank you.
Likewise, Eric. Yeah, this was a ton of fun. Yeah.
Awesome.